Hi, my name is Faith Rush, and I'm so excited to be here with you guys today giving this message. And we are going to talk about a very, very special person in the Bible. But before I talk about them, I'm going to ask you a few questions. And the first question is, how many people do you know who have changed their name? So technically, your name to chicken or pizza or dog if you really wanted to. My second question for you is, do you know anyone with more than 3 names? So most people just have a first name and a first name and a middle name and a last name. But some people have 2 first names or 2 middle names, and a lot of people now have 2 last names. But do you know anyone with 2 names? Now, we're going to talk about somebody who changed their name and has 2 names. So people call them by 2 names. And that is Saul or Paul. So Saul started out, he was a really, really bad guy in the Bible. He was a villain. He would get people stoned, which stoned means that people throw rocks at you until you die. And nobody uses it anymore because it's a very, very bad way to die. And to kill somebody. So he did a lot of very bad things. And one day, Saul was on his way to a city called Damascus. He, all of a sudden, had this really big light flash on him. And I'm going to read you the story. When he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed all around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting," he replied. "Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." Now there were guys who were traveling with him, and they didn't know what to do. I wouldn't really know what to do if somebody fell on the ground either and couldn't get up, because Saul got blinded, so he couldn't see anything. And he was blind for 3 days, which is a pretty long time, and he couldn't eat, and he couldn't sleep, and he couldn't drink, which blind people in real life can do all those things, but he couldn't do it because it was a special kind of blindness. But he had to get helped into the city, and there was a disciple there who the Lord told to go help him because he had started praying to God, asking him for this to go away. So he helped him not be blind, and the Lord made him unblind. And the second that he wasn't blind anymore, he started preaching about God. Isn't that crazy? The guy who didn't like God all of a sudden did. And that is what we call a conversion, where he wasn't a Christian and he didn't like God and he didn't like Christians, and then he was converted so that he did. And he started preaching everywhere. Became what we call a missionary, where he goes and preaches the word of God and talks about God all over the world. But he went and started doing that, and a lot of people were really scared of him because he had changed his opinion just like that, and people didn't really know why, and people were scared of that. So Saul, who had changed his name, like we talked about, he changed his name to Paul, and people called him by Saul or Paul, but he actually went to go try to join the disciples of Jesus. So they were they were preaching all over, just like Paul was. So he tried to join them, but they were scared of him. But this one disciple named Barnabas took him in and helped him find his way, and he traveled all over. Now, this is a map of what the area looked at the time. So that's Italy, and this is the whole sea. And you see all of those lines and all the different colors? those are all different journeys and different trips that he took all over. Now, back in those days, they didn't have cars and they didn't have planes to take them places. So whenever they wanted to travel somewhere, they either had to take a cart or donkeys, or they walked, or they took boats. So anytime they would cross an ocean, they would take a boat, and it wasn't like a big cruise ship that we see now or really big sturdy boat. They would a lot of times be really small wooden boats, which were not safe. But, and even when they were walking, they didn't have like big fur coats or anything like that kept them warm. So they didn't have a lot of food either. So they were traveling around to all these places, not having a lot of food, and they had to depend on a lot of people a lot. The person and the thing that they had to depend on most was God. Because on their travels, they had a lot of things happen to them. In one city where they went to, Paul actually got stoned himself, and usually that would make somebody die. So the people in the city were really, really angry at all the disciples that had come into their town, and this whole mob started stoning Paul. And once they thought that he died, they dragged him out to the edge of the city and just left him there. So the disciples came out there, and once they had all gathered around, Paul got up and he walked away. Isn't that crazy? That never happens, because that's usually how people die. But the Lord took care of them and made sure that he was on his way so that he can continue spreading the Lord's word. And they had a lot of more things happen to them. They got thrown in prison a lot. They got beaten up a lot. They got, like, people would run them out of cities because they didn't like them. But they converted so many people, and they are responsible for a lot of us knowing, because a lot of churches wouldn't have been there without them. And I think it's so cool that the person that hated God the most ended up being one of the most faithful followers and supporters of God. And most of the New Testament, which is the second half of the Bible, a lot of that is written by Paul. But a lot of his letters to the churches and to different people are all in there in between the disciples. He is probably the disciple with the most books and the most stories in the Bible where he wrote it, and he wrote everything down. And I think that's so cool. God took somebody and converted him over to make him that way, and that God carried him through all of that. That even when he was this close to dying, that God helped him, God saved him, and God had his back. All right. It's been so fun to be able to talk to you guys, and I will see you sometime soon. Bye!
Good news. Good news. Good news. Good news. Good news. Good news.
Good news!
Of great joy. Of great joy. Of great joy. Great joy. All people. All people.
All people!
For all people. For all people. Let's get to work. Let's get to work. Let's get to work. Let's get to work.